Good night, Grandpa.
He watched the smile on the child's face a moment longer, before he gave her a nod, and the young girl turned away from his hut. Sten closed his eyes, then opened them again.
Wait, just a moment.
He hobbled inside, grabbed a small wooden box that had once belonged to his wife, opened it, and pulled out a silver pendant. 2 birds had been carved into it, and at the sight he felt his heart beating faster. The man hobbled back out and noticed that the girl really had waited for him. She was his world now. One of the last people still willing to even interact with him, and the small basket with bread next to his door was proof of that.
I want you to have this. Take it and keep it safe. It should bring you luck.
He stretched out his hand and watched the girl snap the small silver disc with the cord from his fingers. A mischievous smile played around her lips.
Thanks, Grandpa. I'll come back tomorrow.
The man smiled, nodded, and felt wetness around his eyes. No, he couldn't just let her go.
Can you send over your mother or your father tomorrow? I don't think I'll be good company.
He replied, and watched the girl's brow furrow before she shrugged her shoulder and nodded.
Okay, take care, Grandpa.
Sten smiled and waved to her as she turned around that last time, then quickly ran back up the small path that disappeared beneath the trees. He stood there, unmoving, even long after the child had vanished and the noise of the forest returned to being the only thing he could hear. This was his life. This was what his life had gotten him in the end. An almost empty, small hut, neither family nor neighbors, and only a handful of people who were still willing to even look after him. The tears had long dried from his eyes, and Sten grabbed a small axe hanging by the door, looked out, and then stopped again. No. Chopping wood was pointless, especially today. He wouldn't be here tomorrow, he knew, so he'd be leaving it behind anyway. Sten shook his head again, put up a smile, hobbled back inside, and closed the door behind himself. The pain was surprisingly manageable today, which was probably one last gift by the gods for one like him, who was about to leave this earth. He could only shake his head, since he didn't dare mutter a curse. Those fickle gods punished easily and hardly ever forgave, even if it was his last night here. Now especially wasn't the time to anger any of them. He slowly hobbled over to the small chair at the table and blindly grabbed hold of one of the books he had lying around. The Havamal, he realized with a glance, and a smile formed on his lips. Odin's words of wisdom seemed like a good choice for his last evening. Around him, the candles were already burning, bathing the small hut in enough light for him to read as he hunched over the manuscript.
With all doorways, before walking through, you must look around. You must peer around. One cannot know where enemies are sitting inside.
Sten smiled as he enunciated every single syllable, then felt a sudden breeze blow through the hut that made the flames on the candles flicker. A cold chill gripped him, followed by a single bead of sweat that ran down his old and scarred back.
Why did you kill me?
The voice, a woman, asked. She was standing behind him, staring at him, and by the flickering of the light, Sten already knew that she was real, but not from this world. At least not anymore.
I have killed many, for a few different reasons. Show me your face, and I will answer your question.
The cold breeze blew again, and this time he thought he could hear someone walking toward him. Suddenly, a hand softly touched his shoulder.
But why me?
He He looked over and could see the hand. There was a ring on one of the fingers, and suddenly a memory flashed through his mind. A long time ago, back when he had been a young, impressionable man just barely out of childhood, there had been an attack on their village. Not from some foreign force or anything, those hardly ever happen, but from another town not too far away. It probably had started out as a feud between a family from there and one from here, but one night the others raided his town. They took cattle, food, and even loot. In response, the elders had agreed to strike back, and Sten had volunteered almost before the decision had been announced. He and his friends, Ulf and Arne, had started a competition with each other. Who could get the most loot? He didn't smile at the memory. Even though he had thought it was a great time, now, looking back, it had been the point where his life had gone awry. The first time he had joined in a real fight, one with weapons, even though the elders had told them not to take lives unnecessarily. What would his life have been like if he hadn't volunteered? Well, his friends wouldn't have talked to him anymore, probably. Maybe his father would have been disappointed. Or maybe elated. His mother would have understood. He knew that much. Back then, he joined up with his friends and a bigger group of 24 adults, an axe and a shield in his hands, as they had started their journey just as the sun began to set. The hour's trip to the other village had felt like pure ecstasy to him. Ulf and Arne had told him about what their parents had said. To take something of value, to not run away, to show everyone who the strongest were. Sten shook his head as he sat at a table, then looked over at the hand on his shoulder. Strength. What a strange concept. They had reached the village when the sun had just set and stormed in, weapons high above their heads. Yet all they had found were a few shabby huts and maybe 5 men of fighting age. The battle had stopped before it had even started, and anger had spilled over him and his 2 friends. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Sten had kicked down a door and had found a woman sitting by a hearth. He could still remember Arne's growling voice and Ulf's angry shouts. The woman just stared at them. He remembered the anger inside, the rage at her defying them. His arms started to tremble at the table, and his fingers brushed over the manuscript. The feeling of the axe in his hand, the sight of the sharp edge glimmering in the flickering light of the hearth. He still couldn't forget that. Neither could he stop dreaming of the woman's face as he had struck her down with a single swing of his weapon, hearing that sickening crunch and his friend's gasps. Sten remembered her eyes so vividly. That gaze. Shock that turned to sadness. Then, for a tiny, flickering moment, anger. He understood why she had come here as the first visitor for his last night on Earth. The light had gone out of her eyes while he had stood over her, the head of his axe dripping with blood.
She attacked me!
He remembered his own shaky voice and the stares he got from his friends before. After a few seconds, they finally started nodding along. That silver ring on her hand. He had taken it with him, together with some other useless baubles. The full-grown men of the attack party, in the meantime, had gathered all they could carry, and they walked back home as a group. Some of them had thrown him disgusted glances. Others had patted his back for drawing blood. Sten felt sick now at the thought, almost as much as he had back then.
Why did you kill me? I didn't do anything to you.
The woman's voice, right by his ears, sounded not angry, but sorrowful. What would he say if he were the same kind of person as back then? That she had deserved it for being weak? What a disgusting sentiment, he now thought. But yes, he probably would have told her that. Or that she just should have complied, even though he knew part of him wanted to strike her down anyway, for any reason, or no reason at all. The fingers on the manuscript stopped, and Sten finally managed to get himself under control again.
I killed you because I was just a boy.
He started and lowered his head, and felt the hand grip his shoulder even more tightly.
Just for that? Was my life worth so little?
He could hear her anger and felt it cutting into him like ice.
No,
Sten replied, not lifting his face.
I was weak. And I wanted to look strong in front of all the others. I took your life because I knew you wouldn't fight back.
The hand disappeared from his shoulder.
What happened to my ring?
Her voice didn't sound angry anymore, and Sten let out a shallow breath.
I gave it away to someone I truly cherished. And I'm sad to say, I don't know what happened to it since.
The woman walked around him, but Sten didn't look up. He didn't want to see her face. What if she had that same expression now as back then? That horrible last one. The flickering of light finally stopped, and with it, the presence he could feel vanished as well. Sten found himself alone in the small hut, the manuscript still on the table, and the light of the candles filling the room. Was this what his last night here would be like? A reckoning. He could feel a bead of sweat running down his back at the thought. And what would happen to him tomorrow, once he was dead? Would he wake up in Valhalla, at the banquet table? Or would his afterlife be one giant battle where warriors slew each other until the end of time? In his dreams, he had witnessed a second one over and over again. A horrible, bloody battlefield that would never end. To kill and be killed over and over again, without even a moment's rest. That sounded like hell to him. The lights flickered again, and Sten suddenly smelled a scent in the air he hadn't come across in years. Bluebells. Her favorite flower. Tears shot into his eyes as he wanted to look back to where it had come from, but a hand suddenly grabbed his head and forced it down. The touch wasn't aggressive or hard, but the spirit that had now entered his hut made it known that he wasn't to look up. Sten could recognize the person just by the scent, and the fact that she wouldn't speak a single word almost broke his heart.
Frida, please let me look at you.
His wife's hand stayed on his neck. She didn't let him raise his head.
Just one last time.
He could feel her hand trembling, but she still didn't let go. What would happen if he looked at her? Would he die immediately? Would something even worse happen? Sten shook his head as best he could, then finally relaxed.
You win. Again.
He admitted, and then felt her hand softly stroke his neck. Just like back then, he thought with a sad smile. When she had been alive, before the plague took her from him. Sten closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh. He could smell her, still feel her.
Why have you come here? Will I see you again?
The hand on his neck didn't move. Why had she come here if she couldn't answer him? Was it just to see him again as well? Or to say goodbye one last time? Sten reached back over his shoulder and softly touched her hand. The skin he felt was cold and shivering.
Wherever you are, I will find you again. This, I promise.
He whispered, then felt her shaking off his hand, patting his head, and the lights flickered before her scent disappeared again. Sten straightened up and took a deep breath. That last touch. She had wanted to say something, but Vidar had been born mute. It had never bothered him until today. What had she wanted to tell him? Or had it been a warning? Don't look at the spirits. He could understand that much at least. Now, if only... A chill far colder than anything he had felt before blew through the cabin, and Sten could immediately sense a presence close behind him. The lights flickered and dimmed, and as the hand touched his shoulder, he couldn't help but shiver. Sten glanced over and could feel the cold sweat sticking to his skin. He was allowed to look at the hand. That much he had accidentally realized during the first spirit's visit, and the extremity that was now on his shoulder was a well-known one for him. There were scars, a missing digit, and even the streaks of blood he had seen back when he had stood over the lifeless body.
Ulf,
He said, the name of his childhood friend and comrade.
Hey.
A cold, curt reply came. Heavy boots made the floorboard behind him ache, and not for the first time, Sten felt how old he had gotten. Back when they had been fresh adults, a few years after that dreadful fight with the other village, they had boarded the same boat, together with Arne, and had sailed off for the real raids. Sten had stood out even there through his swiftness, but also his brutality. Attacking villages, raiding homes, taking whatever they could get. It had been exhilarating back then. He still remembered the first time they had fought against something akin to a warrior from the other lands. A man, about as young as him, with a sword, who had tried to protect his home from the invaders. Of course they had killed him. Well, Arne brought him down, but Sten had delivered the final, fatal blow.
So, you remember?
His friend's voice came from his back, and Sten nodded without lifting his head.
I remember it all. Their faces, their screams. I remember the fear in their eyes and in my heart. Even back then. Although I would have never admitted as much to you or Arn.
The spirit behind him let out a dry, cruel chuckle.
You're lying.
He claimed, and Sten closed his eyes but shook his head.
I am not. Back then, I was afraid. Scared for my life and yours. The whole way there, all I could think about was what I would tell your mother if you didn't make it back.
He heard what sounded like a growl coming from behind.
That's another lie. You've lost yourself through the years, it seems. Back then, I could see it in your eyes. As could Arna. You wanted it. You were addicted to it. The fighting, the raiding, everything. I saw your face when we jumped off the boat and onto the land. You looked ecstatic. Like a man possessed. I could tell any time you saw someone who looked like he could put up a decent fight, you almost fell into this frenzy. Just like one should.
Again, he shook his head, unwilling to admit to anything. He could feel Ulf's eyes on him, burning with this well-known intensity. Had the raids been fun? He had thought that they had, at least when he had been younger. But that had all been before he had met Frida. Now, as he was looking back, it just seemed pointless. The cruelty, the danger. They had followed an ideal that shouldn't have existed in the first place.
We were hardly more than children back then, Ulf.
he finally replied, still keeping his eyes down at the manuscript.
We behaved like it was all a game. And you also know how it ended. Especially you.
In his memories, he saw his friend, standing there by the shore, his eyes slowly glazing over. Blood was pooling down by his feet, seeping into the rough, wet sand and dirt. The fear in his eyes had been palpable.
I stood, I fought, and I died on my own 2 feet.
The voice replied from behind him, the words echoing through the small hut.
You didn't die on your feet. You were screaming and crying in my arms.
Sten finally replied, and suddenly the hand on his shoulder gripped him tight enough to make him wince. He remembered his friend standing there at the beach, using his spear as a crutch. Sten had run over to him after the initial shock had worn off, and before he could even reach him, Ulf had fallen down to his knees. The unfocused eyes were teary. The one hand that wasn't holding the spear was beneath the leather shirt, trying helplessly to staunch a wound that would take his life. Sten remembered grabbing him by the shoulder and seeing those 2 eyes staring up at him, now full of fear and sorrow. His friend had opened his mouth, had tried to say something, but nothing except a gurgling sound had come from his throat. That had been the first time he had truly thought about what they were doing at all. About the danger and the hurt they spread. He had helped his friend lie down and had taken his hand as tears were running across the dying man's cheeks. Those last moments had felt like an eternity on their own. He still remembered it all so clearly. The stench of blood and entrails in the air. The heat of his friend's skin, which slowly started losing its warmth. A sour breath, gurgling noises. And then, at the end, a final whisper under tears.
I want to go home.
Maybe it's you who lost your way, old friend.
Sten murmured and felt the grip of the hand growing even stronger. He winced, but kept staring down at the manuscript.
Your last act was the first true thing either of us did that day. I was lying to myself back then, and I continued doing so until I met Frida. My bluster got you killed as well. For that, I am sorry.
The hand on his shoulder, not just as cold as on the day he had held it for the last time, dug into his shirt, and he felt the man bend down behind him to bring his mouth close to Sten's ear.
You are weak. A disgrace to all of us. Turn around and face me, you coward, and prove that you're still a warrior at heart.
Part of him wanted to do as the man said. Even though Sten didn't want to admit it to himself, the small ember was still inside him, still screaming at him to jump up and charge at the man, to follow him into hell and prove which of them was stronger. But that part didn't control him anymore. He shook his head and said,
I wish you well, old friend.
which earned him a scoff, before the light flickered again and the presence in his back vanished. Would the whole night go on like this? One after another of his old acquaintances would turn up and ask him questions and then leave. What would happen once the day broke? He knew he would be dead by then. He could feel it as clearly as the manuscript under his fingertips. But how? The flames of the candle flickered, then went out as freezing air filled his lungs, and all the hair on his arms stood up at once. Someone else had come.
I am the last one.
A voice whispered somewhere behind him. It was one he knew all too well. One that still haunted his dreams to this day.
Survive me, and you shall be free.
The edge in the words couldn't be missed. Sten felt himself shivering, the wounds on his body burning, and cold sweat covering his skin. Just as any pack had its leader, so did every town. And Vidar, a man who had once only been a couple of years older than him, had taken over their town before Sten had even turned into a real adult. It had been clear from his birth that he would lead the men and women of this area. By title and rank, he had been nothing more than a Herseer, a commander of a small force, but if fate had been kinder to him, he could have become a Jarl or, even in time, a king. Sten had looked up to him as a young man. He had been the one to rally all the youths, set their course, and choose the targets. A single glance at him had been enough to know that he was born to be something more than them. And after Ulf's death, this man had started to scare Sten down to his bones. He had been a living embodiment of what he could have become. Not because of his prowess in battle or tactics, but because of the brutality and viciousness their leader had displayed. Not even 18 years old, he had killed the last leader of their town with his own 2 hands, and taken over as if it had been his God-given right. Which might have been true.
It's been a long time.
The voice behind him growled, and Sten felt one of the drops of sweat drip down and land on the manuscript. This one was dangerous. Far more so than all the others combined. He had seen him in battle. He had faced him in one as well, and had carried wounds from it since that made him into the hobbling mess he was today. Sten chewed his lip as he heard the floorboards behind him creak. Something touched his shoulder, like the hands before, but this time it wasn't flesh, but metal. He glanced over, and in the almost darkness he could still see the blade that had cut him from his collarbone down to his hip.
You are trembling like a child.
The man behind him said with utter disdain in his voice.
Your flesh remembers the sensation of my axe, I see.
The giant axe was touching him softly, and he knew that the man was standing there, holding the weapon in a single hand. As he had always liked to do, to show strength and intimidate. He had used that trick not just in duels or fights, but also in discussions. Sten remembered feeling the blade of the axe getting softly pressed against the skin right above his ear, after he had returned from the raid where Ulf had died.
You were a failure back then, and that looks like you turned into an even bigger failure now, trembling like a newborn goat from just this much.
Sten felt the blade of the axe move closer to his neck, until the ice-cold metal touched his skin.
I never liked you, you know. At first you were just annoying and weak, but then you turned into a coward as well.
There wasn't much Sten could stay back. To Vidar, he really would look like a wimp, wouldn't he? He had never seen the man treat anyone with respect or courtesy, and no one ever complained either. That man, now behind him, had been fated to be something more than him, which was probably the reason why he had turned up here. Because it had been Sten who had marked the beginning of this great man's end. Was that the reason Frida had turned up? To warn him or give him strength? The blade of the axe touched his neck, and Sten could almost feel it cutting his skin apart.
You know, I made a mistake during our duel. When I cut you open from neck to hip, I pulled back so as not to kill you too quickly.
Sten knew that he was telling the truth. The man had been proficient enough to torture many of his opponents to death during duels, and the only reason he had been allowed to survive was Vidar's assumption that a wound would kill him. Well, he survived. Disfigured and broken, exiled and shunned by almost everyone. But he had survived while Vidar had died.
I liked how you started to cry when you were lying on the ground, bleeding. That one really lifted my spirits.
His mocking tone made Sten bite his lip. He was trying to get a rise out of him.
You were so pitiful. They all laughed at you, don't you remember? Even your friends' families were screaming in joy. You lost it all, and for what?
He could almost taste wet dirt again, like on that day. The smell rose into his nose. Blood, rain, and vomit. He remembered it all so clearly. That pain that took away almost everything else was only getting pushed back by the fear of death. He had looked up at Vidar, standing there with his axe in hand, laughing as he mocked him. But Sten also remembered the small droplets of blood running down their leader's neck. A cut, hardly longer than a finger, right at the base of his jaw. That one had come from him, and it was the one that sealed Vidar's fate. He smiled bitterly to himself.
You know, I could hear your screams as well. Just a week later, when you couldn't even lift your own axe anymore, and were crawling around your house, howling.
It was the first time he had ever mocked him, and for a moment, Vidar himself seemed to lose the ability to speak. Was it shock or anger? The axe disappeared from his shoulder, and only a moment later, he heard the blade cut through the air. It was coming from right above, as if the man was intent on splitting his head, and Sten flinched as the air touched him. Instead of cutting into his flesh and bone, he could see the axe hitting the table in front of him, cleaving it and the manuscript on it clean in two. The piece of furniture collapsed, and Sten could see the axe getting pulled back up again, until it disappeared from his sight. He was shaking, trembling on the uncomfortable chair. Would he strike him next? The cold air around him seemed to fill up with the stench of blood. Vidar was angry, enraged. Sten could feel his heart beating so hard it hurt his chest. His leg was almost cramping up from the stress alone. Somewhere behind him, the man shifted his weight and the floorboards creaked again. Was he getting ready to strike? No. If that were the case, he would have at least cut off one of Sten's arms. Following his instincts, he smiled and shook his head.
You missed me.
He mocked him again and felt the air starting to vibrate.
How dare a maggot like you! Say it again and I'll split you from head to toe!
The voice thundered through the small hut. But now, Sten could feel himself growing eerily calm. It wasn't a real Vidar. For whatever reason, he couldn't kill him or even hurt him.
Do you want to know something? I think I won our duel after all.
Sten said, and heard the man behind his back growling like a rabid animal.
I survived my wounds, while you died like a dog in that town hall. People still helped me, and as you perished, everyone around here breathed a sigh of relief. You were weak, that is all. I was stronger than you.
The axe struck the floor, but this time Sten didn't flinch.
You were always weak. Once you were banished, I went to your house.
He heard the angry voice behind him. It didn't matter, he told himself. He already knew. The house he had lived in with Frida had burned down the night after his duel, and everything had been lost.
I even found a ring in there. Small and silver.
Sten shot up from the chair as anger suddenly surged in his mind.
Too bad your wife was already dead when our duel started. I would have taken her as well, even if she was defective.
The cruel laugh coming from the thing behind him was too much. He could feel the hate and rage, thought to be forgotten so long ago, suddenly moving him again. Sten whirled around, but before he could even turn his body fully, the scent hit his nose. The smell of bluebells flooded him. He noticed it and couldn't help but close his eyes. A sudden, stinging pain shot through his chest as he lost his balance mid-turn and fell to the floor. Dust rose up, but Sten hardly noticed it. All he smelled was those flowers. He blinked while the pain still pulsed through him and could see a pair of feet right in front of his face. Not the giant boots of a warrior, but the ones of a young woman.
I took everything from you before. Look at me, you coward, and face your destiny.
The angry shout of the Viking warrior got quieter and quieter until finally the voice disappeared. It was her doing, Sten knew. She was here with him again. He could finally look up at her. Trying to get off the floor, he suddenly felt another pang of pain. Then one side of his body went limp. A hand, warm and soft, touched his cheek and wiped away the sweat and dust. No, he mustn't see her. Not like this. The pain was getting worse instead of weaker. His whole chest seemed to be on fire. The body that had once carried an axe and brought pain and death to so many stopped struggling as it lay on the floor. Sten closed his eyes and took a last, painful breath.
Can we go home now? Please.
He asked, and the hand softly patted his cheek. The woman sighed, then groaned as she finally managed to get out of the forest and found the hermit's hut in the clearing. Her daughter had begged her to go and look after the old man today, since he had warned her that he wasn't feeling well. She knew his name, of course, and also his story, but her father had once insisted that they should help him whenever they could. So they had, and they would continue to do so, even if it sometimes felt like a chore. She reached the entrance, knocked, and suddenly found the door swinging inward. The interior was a mess, the woman noticed immediately. 2 halves of the table were lying in the middle of the room. Pieces of a cut-up manuscript were strewn about. And there, between what looked like 6 different footprints in the dust, lay the man. She took a step and stopped. Even in the low light, she could see that the old man wasn't breathing anymore. The woman raised one hand to her mouth and then let out another quiet sigh. His head was turned her way, and she could see that at least the old man had died with a smile on his lips.